No one expected a voice as soft as a whisper could silence all of Washington. The spoon fell to the floor. No one bent down to pick it up. A hand holding a wine glass froze mid-air. Napkins remained neatly folded, yet no one touched the appetizers just served. The entire restaurant, once buzzing with lunchtime political chatter, fell silent like a courtroom hearing its final verdict. In the center of that space, Jasmine Crockett stood tall, her right hand gently gripping her bag strap, her left arm relaxed by her side, as if weighing whether to take another step. Her eyes were not on the manager who had just offered an awkward smile. She didn't look at the curious, condescending, or quietly averted stares. She was looking at the man who had just spoken. A tall man with silver hair, in a light gray suit, stood 4 tables away. No introduction was needed. No words had to follow. Everyone knew who he was. John Roberts, Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court. The man whom the press had, for 2 decades, called the symbol of powerful silence, never leaning left, never leaning right. And today, he had spoken a single sentence that froze the entire room. There were confused glances, darting eyes. But Jasmine, she didn't retreat. She didn't react. She simply stood there, composed, as if this silence was the very answer she had been waiting for. Why would someone like John Roberts, a man always standing between 2 worlds, choose to speak up for a woman so often pushed to the margins? To understand that moment, we have to go back a few hours. Which state are you watching from? If this story resonates with you, subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the moments that silence a nation. Friday, Washington, D.C. The sun beat down harshly on the dome of the Capitol. It was barely past 11, but the pavement was already radiating heat, sending up a stifling layer of warmth like a thin sheet of molten asphalt against the faces of passing pedestrians. Jasmine Crockett had just left a congressional hearing on federal access to education. She was the final member to ask a question, and the only one to make the Department of Education representative pause and say, "We'll have to respond in writing." A small victory, but no one acknowledged it. She held her handbag, turned off her phone, and walked quickly out of the building. She wasn't accompanied by any aides. No reporters were waiting outside, and it wasn't because she was avoiding the media. Simply put, today, she wanted to be just another person. That afternoon, she had lunch plans with Maya, an old friend from law school nearly 20 years ago. Maya was in town from New York for a meeting, and they had found out by chance that they were both in D.C. that day. Jasmine let Maya make the reservation. She had only texted, "As long as it's quiet and camera-free." The restaurant was called Aurum, an upscale spot frequented mostly by high-ranking officials and lobbyists. No big signs, no advertisements. If you were in the circle, you knew where it was. Double-glass soundproof doors, polished black stone walls, staff in tailored suits rather than uniforms. Everything about the place was designed to signal, this is not for ordinary people. Jasmine arrived at 11:42. She wore a knee-length black linen dress, lightly draped in a pale gray blazer. Her hair was tied low, no striking makeup, just slightly dry lips after hours of hearings. On her left wrist, an old leather watch, a birthday gift from her father. In her right hand, her phone, set to silent. The host was a white man in his 50s, fit build, salt and pepper hair slicked neatly like a coat of silver varnish. His shirt cuff was embroidered with an H. Jasmine noticed but said nothing. He smiled but without warmth, a kind of conditional politeness, cold like the marble beneath her feet. "Good afternoon. Do you have a reservation?" Jasmine nodded. "Maya Lewis, table for 2, 11:45. He slid his hand across the tablet screen, skimmed the list, looked back up and smiled again. A slightly wider smile, but still without a single real crease in his face. I'm afraid I don't see that name on today's list." Jasmine tilted her head. She didn't seem surprised. She didn't raise her voice. Maya Lewis, Lewis. She said she booked it yesterday. She held up her phone with the message, but the man didn't glance at it. I understand, but we require confirmation directly from the guest who made the reservation. If the name's not in the system, I'm afraid. She cut in, not sharply, but with a steady breath. I'll wait for her to arrive. The man gave a faint chuckle, and this time his eyes shifted slightly like he was seeing her through a familiar lens. I'm sorry, but we can't allow unverified guests to remain in the dining area. It's our policy. A couple sitting near the entrance turned their heads. They said nothing, but their gaze lingered a beat too long. A look that said, "Someone doesn't belong." The woman in the cream-colored dress absent-mindedly set down her wine glass, her eyes fixed on Jasmine. The atmosphere in the restaurant thinned, not because the sound disappeared, but because people chose not to fill the silence. Jasmine stood still for a few seconds. She didn't step forward. She didn't back away. She simply stayed. A moment of waiting no one defined. No one defended her. No one asked why. Waitstaff passed by and averted their eyes. The host remained upright, hands clasped at his waist, chin slightly raised as if enacting every protocol of civilized society. Only Jasmine, alone, holding her bag, eyes fixed on the man in front of her, and the stares from nearby tables had still not turned away. No one spoke, not yet. So, what exactly is this policy? Jasmine asked, her tone steady. She didn't sound annoyed, nor did she emphasize her words. Yet the question posed in a refined space like Orem suddenly felt heavy, as if she weren't just inquiring about a reservation, but quietly confronting something deeper. The manager kept his smile unchanged. We require confirmation of the reservation from the person who made the booking, either by phone or through our system. If you're not that person and your name isn't on the list, then I'm afraid. Jasmine nodded slightly. She booked it through Open Table. I can show you. I believe you, the man cut in, a beat quicker than expected. But we have internal protocols. Every reservation must be verified against the identity of the arriving guest. I hope you understand. The air seemed to tighten. That phrase, "I hope you understand," rang out like a polite rejection preloaded from a script. A brown-skinned waitress stepped out from the back carrying a tray of drinks. She glanced briefly at Jasmine, her gaze lowered, then quietly placed the tray on a table near the entrance. On her way back, she paused for just half a second, long enough to whisper, "I'm sorry." Jasmine turned her head. The waitress had already bowed and walked away. No more words. No hesitation. The manager tilted his head slightly. "You can wait outside. Once your friend arrives, we'll recheck the information." "You want me to leave this restaurant?" Jasmine asked, her voice noticeably lower for the first time. "We're simply following policy." A couple at the table to the left glanced over. The man wore a faint, puzzling smirk, almost entertained. The woman next to him rolled her eyes and muttered something Jasmine couldn't make out, but she didn't need to. She had seen that reaction hundreds of times, in hearings, in Capitol hallways, even at the law school where she once interned. That kind of silence, just enough for you to feel you don't belong. Jasmine stood upright. Her hand was still on the strap of her bag, unmoving. "Can you tell me, specifically, which policy states that a guest not listed must leave the waiting area?" The manager pressed his lips together. "We have internal house rules. For security and to ensure quality of experience, we prefer not to have unreserved guests remain." "Even if that guest is invited by someone who made the reservation?" "That is correct." Jasmine's eyes softened, not from disappointment, but from knowing the answer in advance and still asking, just to hear it said aloud. No one in the restaurant spoke. The nearby tables carried on, but more quietly. Water was poured more slowly. Eyes darted but avoided contact. Everyone saw. yet chose not to be involved. A quiet breath escaped her. Jasmine let go of her phone, slipping it into her blazer pocket. "I see," she said, and stood still. She didn't leave. She didn't argue. She just stood there. A black woman in an upscale restaurant in the heart of the U.S. Capitol, being asked to leave a space where she had a reservation over an internal policy no one was willing to cite in writing. The manager started to look uneasy. He adjusted his tie, took a small step forward. "Ma'am." "No need to say more." Jasmine cut him off. Her voice wasn't raised. It wasn't angry. It was just clear. "I don't need another explanation. I've heard enough." At that moment, the lobby seemed to freeze. No one flipped through menus. No one spoke. A young man in a suit at the opposite table set down his wine glass and didn't pick it back up. The waitress from earlier glanced toward Jasmine, then quickly turned away. It wasn't the air conditioning. It was a chill from the silence of those who chose to witness and say nothing. No one stepped in. No one said, "Let me double-check for you." No one said, "Something seems off here." Not a single person. The manager spoke slowly, as if trying to maintain control of a conversation that no longer required more words. "We mean nothing personal. Please understand, this is a rule applied to all customers, from high level to low. No discrimination whatsoever." No discrimination. Those two words echoed in Jasmine's mind, like thick black ink smeared across a whiteboard. No shouting, no insult. Just that phrase, at that moment, to someone like her, and it was enough. Jasmine didn't argue. She simply looked at the man. A gaze with no fury, no protest. Just the look of someone who'd seen this all her life and was exhausted from having to keep explaining it. A breath passed. The manager moved slightly, perhaps preparing to gently motion her toward the door. Then, a small sound. Not a chair moving, not a clink of glass, but the soft thud of a menu being placed on a table. No one noticed it at first, because the man sat in a far corner of the restaurant, half hidden behind a marble column. A table for one, by the large window overlooking the park. An older man, thin metal frame glasses, silver hair combed neatly back. A classic leather watch was still on his wrist. No one knew how long he had been sitting there. He folded the menu, placed it down, slowly, calmly. Only when he turned, his chair rotating slightly, did the entire restaurant pause. Everything stopped in one suspended breath. Eyes across the room shifted, heads tilted. Words caught mid-sentence. A few had already recognized him, and then the entire room realized who was sitting there. The older man stood up, right hand by his side, left resting gently on the back of his chair. His posture is upright. His eyes were not scanning the crowd. He looked straight at Jasmine, and as he began walking toward the center lobby where Jasmine still stood silently, no one dared look away. The moment the chair slid back, every motion inside Aurum froze. There was no more clinking of cutlery, no more chairs shifting, no more footsteps of staff, no more polite murmurs about policy at nearby tables. The once refined room, filled with elegant sounds, now held only a single breath, slow, tense, and untouched. The silver-haired man stood still for a few seconds. Then he walked toward the center of the lobby where Jasmine Crockett still stood upright in silence, and the manager maintained a carefully composed face, trying not to flinch. Eyes across the room began to shift. A few whispers emerged. Someone murmured, "Is that John Roberts?" No one answered, because everyone already knew. No nameplate needed, no announcement, no expensive suit or security detail. Just one look, one step, one kind of silence that made others instinctively step aside. That was John G. Roberts, Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court. A man who had long refrained from speaking on many matters, but today he stepped toward something no one else dared touch. He stopped precisely between Jasmine and the manager. He didn't look at Jasmine. He didn't look at anyone else. His gaze was fixed directly on the man in the white shirt with the name tag, General Manager. His voice came steady, calm, not loud, not sharp, but heard by all. "I'm sorry, but I believe I just witnessed something that should never happen in the capital of this country." The manager froze. He bowed slightly. "Sir," he began, voice tight. But John Roberts didn't let him finish. "I don't require grand service here. You don't need to explain yourself to me. But I believe you should hear this. Not because of who I am, but because of who is watching you right now." His eyes swept across the tables. One by one, no one dared meet his gaze. "I've spent nearly 30 years ruling on matters of human rights, liberty, and justice between social classes. I've handed down decisions knowing that no matter who won, half the country would disagree." He paused, then continued slowly. "I do not agree with everything Congresswoman Crockett stands for. We differ, deeply. She debates fiercely. At times, she makes me uncomfortable. But..." This time, he looked at Jasmine for the first time since walking over. "But if the law we're proud of allows for discrimination to take the form of polite smiles, rejections, and the excuse of internal policy, then perhaps justice is already dead, at the very place it was born." That statement landed in the room like a gavel strike. No noise followed, no apology, no protest. The manager swallowed. He stepped back half a pace, a reflex, as if words had become walls closing in around him. He tried to speak. "Chief Justice, we truly didn't mean to discriminate. This is a policy applied to all guests regardless of..." "Regardless," John Roberts repeated, as if cross-examining, though today he wasn't holding court. "Do you honestly believe every guest here would be asked to stand in the center of your lobby, in silence, under those watching eyes, with no one to speak up, just because of a system glitch?" No one answered. John Roberts turned to Jasmine. "Ms. Crockett." She raised her head. She didn't nod, didn't smile. She simply waited. "You don't need to say anything, and you don't need to stay here a moment longer if you don't want to." Jasmine remained silent. Roberts continued, now speaking not to her, but to the room. "I didn't come here today for lunch. I came to see if justice exists beyond the courtroom. And what I just witnessed gave me my answer." He turned back toward his table. Each step carries the weight of a system that is now reflected in the eyes of every onlooker. No one took photos. No one live-streamed, but everyone would remember every word. The manager bowed deeply, but no one was looking at him anymore. Jasmine said nothing, but her eyes no longer held quiet endurance. There was no pain, no triumph, just calm. A kind of calm that only comes when you've chosen not to resist, and yet are protected by justice itself. And when John Roberts placed his hand on the chair and sat back down, turning away from the lobby, the air in the restaurant finally broke. Someone exhaled softly. Someone bowed their head. But no one smiled. Jasmine remained still. She didn't lower her head, didn't nod in gratitude. She didn't offer a soft smile to ease the room. She didn't turn to John Roberts, and he never looked back at her again. The two of them stood in two pillars of silence in a room full of people, as if a silent courtroom had convened in the middle of lunch. But one thing everyone could feel, even after John Roberts had sat down, the dynamic in the room was no longer the same. An invisible wave began to spread, from the center of the restaurant where Jasmine still stood, out to every table corner, to each hand resting on a wine glass, to every gaze now fixed on what would happen next. A female server walked by carrying a silver tray, leaning slightly to avoid brushing past anyone. As she passed behind a guest, her lips barely moved, and she whispered, "That's John Roberts." The guest looked up and immediately pulled out his phone, not to take a photo, but to open Twitter. In a far corner, a college intern working part-time at the restaurant had filmed the entire statement. He didn't know what to do with it, but after seeing how the whole dining room reacted, he decided to send the clip, not to a news agency, not to the press. He sent it to one person, Luke Roberts, John's son, a senior at Yale Law School, a son who had often criticized his father for being too neutral, too silent, too afraid to offend either side. But that night, when Luke received the side-angle video showing his father standing in a room full of silence and inaction, he didn't speak for 3 hours. Then he posted it to his X account with only one caption. He taught me, sometimes justice doesn't live in rulings but in reflexes of moral clarity. L.R. The video began to spread, first among law students, then the former clerks, then young politicians, then independent media, and eventually the major news outlets. The Washington Post quoted the Chief Justice word for word. If the law allows for discrimination through polite smiles, refusals, and the excuse of policy, then perhaps justice is already dead. Politico questioned, John Roberts finally abandoning neutrality? Fox News sneered, Chief Justice stands up for whom? A far-left congresswoman? CNN headlined, when silence is no longer an option, the Chief Justice speaks out in the real world. Clips of his statement were edited alongside landmark cases, Dobbs, Shelby County, and Citizens United. One tweet read, For years, he dodged public judgment, and then he picked a random lunch hour in D.C. to say something that stopped the whole country. Public reaction split into 3 camps. One criticized Jasmine. She made herself the victim. She's playing the race card for political gain. Who knows what happened? Another defended John Roberts. He wasn't siding with anyone. He was siding with the truth. Anyone who attacked him before should take another look. A third group, silent until now, began to speak up. They shared stories of being refused service without understanding why, of recognizing the manager's eyes, of the feeling of standing in luxury, yet being treated like a social mistake. Within 24 hours, the clip reached 3 million views. 12 hours later, it had been translated into Spanish, French, Vietnamese, and Korean. A user in Japan tweeted in native script, If justice can live in a lunch break, then there's no need to wait for a verdict. And Jasmine. She responded to no reporters. When asked, her office only said, Congresswoman Crockett declines to comment. She is currently working with local communities on housing reform. No more, no less. A conservative outlet ran an angry headline. She's using the power of silence to manipulate public perception. But the more they attacked, the more the video was shared. A black teacher in Chicago wrote, For the first time in my life, I saw someone like John Roberts, a man I once believed only held on to power, see someone like me. A young attorney posted, I used to distrust the system, but that day I saw the system pause to listen to itself. And at the center of all this, Jasmine still said nothing. No tweet, no statement, no exclusive interview, only one moment, captured in a single photograph, showed her leaving Orem at the end of that afternoon. She walked slowly, didn't look back. Her right hand held her purse, her left hand hung empty. Her face was unchanged, but her eyes, those eyes, they were the one thing a nation couldn't pretend not to see. 2 days after that fateful afternoon, a small sign appeared on the glass door of the Orem restaurant. White lettering on a black background, no logo, no ornate design. Respect has no exceptions. There was no ribbon cutting, no press conference, no official statement, just a single sign affixed to the double soundproof glass, right where a woman had once been asked to leave for not having her name on a list. The next morning, 4 more restaurants around Capitol Hill posted the same sign. By afternoon, the Riverseed restaurant chain issued a press release. We do not engage in political debate. but we believe human dignity must never depend on uniforms, skin color, or reservation names. At the same time, the Wall Street Journal, one of America's most prominent conservative newspapers, unexpectedly published the full transcript of Chief Justice John Roberts' statement at Orem. No edits, no abridgments, no commentary. Only a one-line introduction, when a sentence isn't written in a ruling, but still makes the system pause and listen. On the third day, Georgetown Law School hosted an open seminar titled Justice Outside the Courtroom, moderated by Professor Miriam Cole, a former judicial clerk for Chief Justice Roberts. She opened with one sentence. "I used to think John Roberts was so restrained that he sometimes disappointed me, but now I understand. He wasn't silent out of fear. He was waiting for the right moment to make silence carry weight." The auditorium was packed with students. Many had to stand along the aisles. A post-event internal survey revealed 82% of Georgetown law students considered Chief Justice Roberts' response an act of living justice, not because he sided with Jasmine, but because he chose to stand with what was right, without needing permission from the system. On social media, hashtags like #JusticeWithoutWords, #RobertsSpoke, and #StandWithJasmine flooded timelines. Several independent artists printed his entire statement on black and white posters, now hanging in the offices of young attorneys, not to support one side, but as a reminder, judgment doesn't always happen in court. Jasmine remained silent. She didn't respond to CNN, didn't accept the New York Times invitation, turned down every talk show offer, even those offering six-figure appearance fees. Public attention turned to her social media, but no posts appeared. Until day 5 at 11:42 a.m., the exact time she had walked into Orem, Jasmine posted one single status. No image, no hashtag. Silence is not weakness. And not everyone needs to shout to reclaim their worth. No emojis, no thank you notes, and none were needed. Within 6 hours, the post had been shared over 1.2 million times. The Atlantic called it a declaration made in silence. USA Today wrote one line. No protest, yet it shook the moral fence of an entire city. The story spread beyond D.C. high schools in California held ethics discussion periods around one question. What would you do if someone was silently rejected right in front of you? A professor at the University of Chicago launched a new research topic: moral silence and institutional complicity, when quiet becomes a legalized form of bias. An independent radio station in Atlanta invited listeners to call in and share moments when they were treated like they were invisible. Caller number 57 was a 72-year-old woman, her voice trembling. "I was once asked to sit near the restroom when dining with my husband, because the restaurant had no other tables. I didn't speak up, but when I saw that video, I cried, not from sadness, but because someone finally stood up. No one asked Jasmine anymore, 'How did it feel?' The question had changed. Have I ever been the person at the next table? Have I ever bowed my head and pretended not to see? Have I ever used policy to shield cowardice?" And then, amid all the noise, a handwritten letter arrived at the District 30 office in Texas. Round handwriting, clumsy but careful. The first line read, "Dear Ms. Jasmine." The letters slanted unevenly, the lines not quite straight, but full of effort. "That day, I saw you online. I didn't understand why they wouldn't let you sit and eat. I asked my mom, and she cried. She said, 'Because you looked like my grandma did a long time ago.' But that day, I noticed something strange. You didn't argue, you didn't speak, yet everyone listened. I've never seen anyone like you before." The closing line. "That day, you didn't need to say anything. But you made a whole generation realize you don't always have to scream to be seen." Emily H., 9th grade, Northview High School. Jasmine read the letter at the end of the day, between the stacks of budget reports and policy drafts. She didn't write back. She simply folded the letter and placed it on the corner of her desk, beside an old photograph of her mother, the woman who once told her, "Don't let anyone tell you that you have to yell to be heard. They'll listen, because you stand tall, not because you shout." 1 week later, Dallas, Texas. The constituent office of Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, a 2-story brick building tucked on a quiet corner in District 30, reopened as usual. No cameras, no lines of people waiting outside the door asking, "What did it feel like when he spoke up?" The room remained unchanged. Sunlight streamed through the blinds, and a whiteboard on the wall still sketched out an unfinished budget plan. The printer in the corner hummed softly. A small cactus leaned toward the brightest light of the day. At the center of the oak desk, between stacks of unsorted files, lay a folded cream-colored letter divided into thirds. No sender address, no postmark, no envelope, just a single line, written in black ink, the handwriting firm and direct. "Thank you for not shouting." But still making an entire nation listen. J.R. Jasmine said nothing. She folded the letter, didn't ask who placed it there, didn't try to decode the initials. Maybe it was a former staffer, maybe a stranger, maybe... It didn't matter. She placed the note to her right beside an uncapped pen. That afternoon, Jasmine appeared in a small classroom at Southern Law School, where she once taught part-time before entering Congress. Only about 20 students filled the room. No cameras, no stenographer, no media team in tow, just a regular classroom, on a regular day, with young people learning how to become defenders of the law. Jasmine stood at the front, without a lectern. In her hand was a small remote. Behind her, the projector displayed a still frame from a video. There was no sound needed. Just the image of John Roberts standing up. No title, no narration, no cuts. Only the moment he laid down his menu, rose from the shadows and walked toward the center of the room. Everyone had seen it before, but today, in this room, it wasn't a viral video. It was living evidence of one thing. Justice isn't seated. It's in the gestures you choose when you rise. No one in class spoke. No one touched their laptops. No one scribbled notes. Every eye was fixed on the frozen image on the screen. Jasmine spoke, her voice low, slow, as though reading something both ancient and never truly written down. They don't fear your anger. They fear your silence. When you have evidence, when you have the truth, and you don't need to scream to make them see it. A female student in the middle row nodded slightly. A male student in the back corner pressed his lips together. No applause. No one whispered, "That was powerful." Only one thing remained in the room. Awareness. Not loud, not rebellious, no banners. Just quiet understanding, forming on its own inside each person. Jasmine continued. Many think justice lives in the courtroom. Others believe it lives in policy. But sometimes, it lives where no one's looking. In a restaurant, in a subtle shake of the head, in the silence of an entire room, and the act of the one person who breaks it. She stepped aside, turned off the projector. Natural light from the windows spilled in, replacing the blue-white hue of the machine. No one asked her to keep going, and no one wanted it to end. Jasmine picked up the pen on the desk, turned it gently between her fingers. Then she looked straight at the students, as if standing before the most important hearing of her career, and asked slowly, "If you ever saw someone being pushed out of a seat they deserved, would you look away or be the first to stand?" No one answered, but there was no need, because some of their eyes had already shifted, no longer looking at Jasmine but turning inward. One student picked up a pen, not to take notes but to cross something out in an old entry. Another opened their laptop, not to search Google, but to type that final question as if making a personal promise. After class, no one asked for a photo. No one rushed over to ask, "Did it feel like a win?" Jasmine left the room. No footsteps followed. She didn't need a send-off. Only when the door closed behind her did a female student open her notebook and write one bold line across a blank page. "Some victories need no parade." I'd like to hear your thoughts. If you've ever witnessed a moment of injustice, did you look away, or were you the first to stand? Share your story in the comments and subscribe for more stories that make a nation stop and listen.